Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to share my proposed 3-week teaching module tailored for tertiary students of linguistics, applied linguistics. The curriculum is specifically designed to be integrated into social linguistics and discourse analysis courses. It's titled Mga Kaagi sa Bagyo, an Ecolinguistic teaching module on Cebuano disaster narratives. So let's start. So before we dive into theory, I invite you to look at the images on the screen behind me. On the left, perhaps you'll agree with me if I say that we cannot treat these merely as photographs of devastation, headlines of recovery. They're also visual representations of a common reality among us, no? Especially here in the Visayas after Bagyong Tino. And not specifically just limited here in the Visayas. Natural disasters can happen anywhere, be it a third world, a first world country. So disasters, specifically environmental disasters such as the storm, which is the focus of the module, serves as historical markers. So they define the very timeline of a community. Perhaps you might have found or might have heard someone say, or perhaps you yourself might have described your lives post or pre-disaster, right? Post-Odette, pre-Odette, after Tino, and so on. In a similar vein, I think that probably the most common one would be pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, though that's a different category. So when we analyze texts, such as news or narratives about the storms, we must ask a critical question. How does language frame these storms? Now, often the discourse frames them as natural inevitabilities. Now, this module uses ecolinguistics combined with critical discourse analysis to sort of move away from that framing and ask whether these disasters are truly unavoidable or if they are, in part, consequence of human and institutional actions, perhaps inactions. So this brings us to the core pedagogical challenge of the module, or proposed by the module. How do we equip students to deconstruct these potentially harmful institutional narratives? And more importantly, how do we help them rebuild these narratives using indigenous conceptual tools? So, to ground our pedagogy, we will use a recent case study, which is Typhoon Tino in 2025. So, the human and the economic toll of the storm was quite staggering. 269 dead, 113 missing, 3.26 billion worth of damages. So the narrative surrounding this disaster usually assigns, as you can see there, actively assigns agency to the typhoon. It uses active verbs to position the storm as the primary actor. So, but semantically, however, the storm functions as a narrative device to sort of mask institutional failures like, say, state corruption. So our students need the analytical tools to parse this exact tension. So towards that end, the module will incorporate a 3-step pedagogical framework, moving from deconstruction to reconstruction. The first week, we focus on the crisis. On the second week, we focus on the deconstruction. On the third week is the reconstruction. Let's try to look at that. So for the first week, we'll be incorporating 2 theoretical pillars, the first of which is the foundational overarching theory, which is ecolinguistics, particularly the one defined by Aaron Stiba. It's an interdisciplinary paradigm that investigates the role of language in the life-sustaining interactions between humans and the environment, humans and other beings. So it treats humans as an integral part of the larger ecosystem, as opposed to a separate entity from the outside looking in. So you have Stiba's idea of stories we live by. The obscure cognitive structures in everyday text that serves to influence how we view the environment, how it configures our ecological worldview. So it's contrasted either as destructive stories, which are anthropocentric narratives that normalize ecological harm, or it can be beneficial stories, which are relational narratives that foster ecological stewardship. And I guess the core idea of using ecolinguistics is to sort of bring attention back to language, Most of the time we use language, most of that it's taken for granted. We're not conscious of the way we use it. So here we bring conscious attention back to language use in relation to said life-sustaining interactions. So how do these stories manifest? Through, of course, our second pillar, cognitive metaphor theory. It draws on Lakoff and Johnson and localized by Lee. We understand that metaphors configure how we understand, how we perceive or act in the world. An unrelated example, you can invest money, you can waste money, you can save, you can waste time, you can save money, you can save time, you can waste time, because the metaphor there is time is money, correct? So obviously, but the thing here is, the storm is not an abstract concept, right? It's something that we can understand. But the thing about the storm here is that its scope is quite large, it's very impersonal. That's why we sometimes feel that it's abstract and it's impossible for us to control. Thereby, we assign agency to it. No, we even name our storms, right? We process it by mapping concrete attributes to it from a source domain, being, for example, a brute animate being, targeted towards the storm, which is the target domain. No, that's why sometimes, or most of the time, we can see the storms as having an eye, a tail, no, capable of being angry, capable of devastating, ravaging, and so on and so forth. So, in week 1, using those two theories, we start with the narrative hook. No, we have the students physically draw Typhoon Tino in terms of how it's personified through narratives, through local narratives. For example, it can be based on headlines, news reports about Tino, such as the one you can see here on the screen. Now, going back, we'll also do a semantic map of the animate storm. We categorize Tino as a character, described as often as angry, ill-tempered, and so on, assigning anatomical attributes to it, such as here. I'm not sure if you can see it. But basically, you assign anatomical traits like it has eyes, a tail, it has agency, it can lash, it can initiate action, it has temperament, it can be angry, it can be vindictive, and so on and so forth. Following that, we have the third pillar, which is critical discourse analysis. If week 1 was about the environment, then week 2 is about institutions. So we utilize Fairclaw's critical discourse analysis to investigate how language acts as a social practice that reproduces unequal power dynamics. So we analyze it across 3 levels: the micro level, which is in terms of the grammar and syntax; the meso level in terms of its newsroom production; and macro level in terms of its socio-political explanation. So, specifically, we are looking at here is discursive strategies. We're going to focus here on the acts of nominalization, wherein deliberate institutional inactions are turned into abstract nouns. Next is the heavy focus on passive agent deletion, wherein responsible actors, possible responsible actors, are removed from the narrative. So when we apply this in the classroom, we do an activization versus passivization exercise. We use a corpus of local narratives surrounding Tino. The students identify here who is activated, and then which ones are passivized. So we equip the students with an agent restoration workshop, basically. So here's a sample. Though, just a disclaimer here, as I wasn't able to edit the one on the right, but here it should be possible student revisions, or potential student revisions in restoring the agent. Because at the end of the day, the one on the left is usually how you would write news headlines, right? It's very neutral, it's passive, and so on, so as to avoid biases. But the thing here is we allow the students to go over the facts of what happened during Tino, We let them analyze different texts, true texts, the facts, and let them arrive at their own conclusion. Basically, allow them to think critically for them to be able to come up with a different headline. A revised headline with the agent restored. So, lastly, we go to the fourth pillar, which is basically how warnings communicate or how warnings are communicated based on modality. We analyze the difference between dapat, kailangan, and maari, pwede. So basically, we go to warnings after looking at these narratives of disaster because like language, warnings are sometimes taken for granted, right? If we're not directly affected, we don't really pay much attention to it, right? So warnings are disregarded and sometimes they do not matter, especially if we're not directly affected by it. So it's important that we also take a look at it. And this applies in the classroom through a modality and lexicon deconstruction. We look at warnings, specifically national warnings such as NDRMC warnings, and then we try to reconstruct it to incorporate beneficial stories, increase its urgency, try to add or incorporate concepts, indigenous concepts of care, like amping, panabang, and so on. So here's a sample. Here are sample alerts of more likely than not, you have already received one of these, right? So we apply this to real-world artifacts. So here you can already see the severe translation friction between the Tagalog text and a possible Cebuano text. These were sent to predominantly Cebuano-speaking regions like Bohol, Cebu, Negros, right? You sent a Filipino-coded warning to them. Perhaps the idea here would have been better to have at least the idea here is not to replace the national system, but to sort of supplement it with a localized, a regionalized variant in the local tongue, to sort of avoid any misunderstanding, non-understanding, and so on. So we use also the phrases, if you can see there, you have very uncertain modals like aasahan, which is not quite certain, at least according to Bacolod's theory. So it's more epistemic uncertainty, predictions. Perhaps we can change that as opposed to just treating people as passive recipients. We can have a call to action to make it better, to make it, to move beyond pure descriptive warnings. So what I propose here is for the students to have an active part in doing this. For their final assessment, they are to use, to create a localized communication plan, specifically culturally grounded emergency alerts, with agentive subjects restored, incorporating ideas of tinabangay, amping, care, and so on. So they're also required to do a multimodal public service announcement video, calling attention to the dangers of the storm, the dangers the storm may bring. So to conclude, this module at its core serves to potentially identify for the students to potentially identify and replace destructive metaphors. It serves to restore accountable targets and changes the language of disaster to equip our communities not just to endure these storms, but to, more importantly, survive it. So here are my references. Thank you very much for listening.